No, don't copy paste. That would be too easy.
Son of a bitch.
All right. For anyone who will be watching on YouTube in the near future, I am just setting up my podcast on the Facebook end, and then we will get going.
Right on. This aggravates the crap out of me. I've been seriously considering getting a drone to do like maybe some aerial shots for like real estate, agents and stuff like that.
Yep.
And I did not realize until I started looking at these drones that anything. So this one of them that I'm looking at weighs what did you say over 250 grams. I have to register it with the FAA.
All right. So we should be live on both Facebook and on YouTube. So I am ready to begin whenever you are.
Go right ahead and start it up whenever you are prepared, sir. Now, are you sharing it on Facebook? Are you sharing this on the CGM page?
Yes, at the moment. Are you not
Okay.
live on the Push for Liberty at the moment?
No, I was going to let you just handle the live stream because that way I didn't have to worry about internet issues because the thing with Robert really.
Oh, at the very end of it.
Yeah, it's got me paranoid.
Yeah, that's it was kind of a anticlimactic finish to a very good interview.
Yeah, I know. I was like, man, we had such a great talk, and at the end, it's just like he cut out, and I could see that it was freezing, and I could see on my end was freezing. I'm like, really, really, come on. I'm hoping Daniel Miller, the interview with Daniel Miller, doesn't do the same friggin' thing.
Hopefully not, because
I will lose my shit.
I expect I expect that to be another really good interview too.
Oh, I think, I'm gonna have 2 weeks in a row. That's gonna be really freaking awesome. That reminds me, I need to check and see if I've had any more downloads on that last podcast I did with Robert. Oh no, the Missouri Liberty Report blew up.
Alrighty, we already have one viewer. So again, for those that are just now starting to tune in, we'll be starting the podcast in just a moment. I am now sharing the podcast around just a little bit, and once I'm done with that, we will begin.
With Robert. Oh no.
I'm unable, apparently, to get into my live feed directly, so I'll have to manually do a couple shares. So I'll just share to a couple of my big pages and go from there.
Right on.
All right, anyone tuning in, please head on over to the Push for Liberty. You can find them on Facebook, give them a like. Also, come on over to the Constitutional Grassroots Movement CGM page and give us a like there. And if you're interested in also following us on YouTube, just look up the Constitutional Grassroots Movement on YouTube and you will find us there. So today, as the description says, we will be reviewing Robert Brown's interview with John on the Push for Liberty. Robert Brown is another constitutional scholar like myself. He just has a lot more national recognition than I do. In their discussion, they covered the Convention of States, the dangers of it, and some of our founding fathers' discussions on the issue, as well as how we can still fix the issues that we have today. So first off, Happy Constitution Day. Today is the day that the Constitution was actually um, signed by our founding fathers. Um, I'm actually very happy to do this live stream today because I did not expect myself to be home and available for the live stream today. Um, so, since today is Constitution Day, I actually have two trivia questions today with regards to uh, the signing of our Constitution. The first question is, what year was the Constitution signed by our founding fathers? And the second question is, who was the first to sign the Constitution? And I will try to remember to answer those questions at the end of the live stream today, simply because of my notes. Um, so, Robert, John, tell me a little bit about the interview with Robert before we
Oh,
get started.
okay. Well, yeah, I'm glad you got my name right the second time
Well,
around.
I just said it backwards. I had a dyslexic moment. I have a lot of those.
That, me too. So, okay, just to give a little backstory here, one of my a good friend of mine, he sent me a link, and it came from his sister-in-law, and he's like, "Hey, do you know anything about this convention of states?" And I said, "Honestly, no, I really don't." And so I went over to the website and started looking around, and I'm like, this looks like the wording of the questions and the statements, and it came from his looked a lot
sister-in-law, and
like,
he's like, "Hey,
oh,
do you
this
know
is something
anything
from a
about this
Republican
convention of
Party
states?" And I
standpoint.
said,
It really
"Honestly,
looked
no."
that way, and I was like, okay, that's ridiculous. And so then I contacted you, Jesse, and Jesse says, I know the exact person you need to talk to. Let me get in contact with him. So he gets me Robert Brown on he gets me set up with Robert Brown, and I we had a great
Tell me, and
great
Jesse says, "I know the
outstanding
exact person you need to talk to."
interview Tuesday, and I couldn't be happier. Again, when I found out he'd been with the John Birch Society for 10 years, I was like, oh, this guy's going to know his stuff. Um, and it was, there was because we only went about an hour or so. And there was so much information jammed into that hour. I'm not going to lie here. I'm going to be honest and say that at first, he came out of the gate swinging, and he was throwing so much information at me that I was like, "Oh, this guy's going to slow down, or I'm going to have an overload." Because, and then my brain finally caught up a little bit, and then I was just blown away by not just the depth of his knowledge, but that from my understanding, which is very very limited, I felt like, there had been some constitutional conventions before. Maybe states had gotten together to try to do things and hadn't worked anything out, because I'd never really heard anything historical happening with these constitutional conventions and a lot of things being, amendments to the Constitution being made or anything like that. And then he said, "Oh, there hasn't been any." I'm like, and then he starts talking about the guy from the I can't keep this guy's name in my head.
Mark Meckler?
Yeah, Mark Meckler. He starts talking about this guy and how he constantly goes to, all these state legislatures and says, "Oh, just send delegates, and you can just say, hey, just only give them the authority to work on this one topic, and that's all they can do." And then he comes in and goes, "That guy's completely wrong," and just tears down his whole, all the information that Mr. Meckler gives them. Robert comes in and completely disintegrates it with his laser sharp, I don't know, beams coming out of his eyes or his brain or whatever, and he destroys it all and leaves it all in shambles. And again, first of all, I want to thank Jesse again for setting us up, setting that interview up. And two, I was completely just blown away, and I came to a realization that somebody, and that somebody is me, needs to get online and find all the Articles of Confederation and start going through them and looking at them and getting uh, and getting myself acquainted with them and finding, and getting the information into my head, because he seemed to just know these things just about right off the top of his head, which I guess that's kind of part of his job. It's,
Yeah.
part of his thing. He needs to know these things, but I was blown away by how much knowledge he's able to retain, because I'm going to hit 50 next year. Let me tell you, the old storage bins in John's head are starting to fill up and information's getting harder to retain. But it did inspire me to go, you know what, I need to dig into these articles of Confederation and really start looking at them, and what some of these founders had to say on topics that I'm sure both of us cover, that I don't know quite as much as I should know, and get myself a better understanding on topics like the Convention of States.
Yeah, I mean, the Constitution, while it's one of the shortest constitutions in the world, it is just so in depth and so refined that this is incredible. Um, there was a famous artist, like way back in the day, like we're talking, I think in the 1500s. I cannot recall his name, but I remember the quote. Um, Perfection is not when there's nothing more to add, it is when there's nothing more to take away. And I think our founding fathers hit the nail on the head with our Constitution, with what they attempted to accomplish. They wanted a limited government that the people had control of, a government that did not have any more powers than what was absolutely necessary in order to accomplish what needed to be accomplished. And what they sought to have was to guarantee the independence of the new states and to guarantee the rights of the people, and that a tyrannical government cannot come back in this country. Um, Unfortunately, as Robert mentioned in the interview the other day with you, he mentioned how our founding fathers had said that it is ultimately the people's responsibility to hold our elected officials accountable, and we are not doing our job, and that's what it all boils down to, is we're not holding our job. And I'll say this again, most likely through the interview. I give the COS props for trying to do that. Well, at least it appears that they're trying to do that. They just, as Robert said, they have some concerns that they refuse to address, and we'll get into that throughout this discussion today. So I'll start off by saying I actually used to be a supporter of the Convention of States, and I had come to the conclusion to be against them through my own studies on our founding fathers, what they believed in, why they believed it, and how it applied to the time, and how it still applies to today, and even more so today in many cases. So, as Robert addressed, they have three primary objectives, and they're term limits, limited government, and fiscal responsibility. So, these are just their primary objectives, and they push these three objectives as if they're the only ones. So first off, we have the term limits. This issue specifically is a much more complex issue than it sounds. I just lost my place in my notes. 1 second. So it's a much more complex issue than anything else. So it'll take a little bit to dissect this issue. So we'll spend a little bit of time on this one. I used to believe in term limits adamantly, just like many others still do. And my reasoning is the same as theirs. We have Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Biden, and all these just, and switching over to the Republican side, you got Mitt Romney, you got McConnell, you've got McCain before he passed away. All these elected officials that just, we have to get rid of them. They are not in line with liberty or the Constitution. And I was thinking, yes, we need term limits because then we can finally kick them out. But through my studies, I ended up learning that we actually had term limits under the Articles of Confederation, and our founding fathers had them removed. And there's a few reasons why they did that. The first was that they found out that term limits did nothing to actually curtail corruption or to prevent corruption. And the only thing that term limits really accomplished was taking away the voice of the people. And what I mean by that is if we have a good representative, we have Thomas Jefferson rises from the grave and runs for office, and he wins. Do we really want to arbitrarily kick him out of office after 2 terms? Like, it's hard enough to find good people to run for office right now. I would be very troubled to see a good representative like Thomas Massey or Thomas Jefferson or James Madison get arbitrarily limited on how long they can serve. It's our job and our responsibility, our civic duty, to hold our elected officials accountable, to re-elect them as long as they're in good standing, and to remove them when they are no longer in good standing. And that is something that we have been failing to do for at least 100 years, maybe even 150 years. And it's just been a gradual downhill process because of that. So I don't see term limits as something to fix that issue. So during those times, our founding fathers ended up taking away the term limits so that they could give a voice back to the people. When putting term limits into a modern perspective, we have even more problems than we did under the Articles of Confederation. One example is the lobbyists that we have in modern day. They were designed for the people to petition their elected officials and candidates, but they are now being used as bribes for elected officials and candidates. That we will give you this money if you will vote this way. When it came down to lobbying was intended to just try and convince a candidate or a elected official the needs of the people, and then they would consider it. But it's become a money game. It's become nothing but a bribery game. It's basically legalized bribery in our current system. Another huge downfall with our modern day versus the 1700s with term limits is that term limits won't change our voting habits. We are already proving that we have very bad voting habits. We had Donald Trump versus Joe Biden, for Christ's sake, in the last election. Our voting habits are not very good if those two pass the primaries. So, if those two can pass primaries and be the top 2 candidates that we have for presidency, how are term limits going to fix anything? We're just going to keep voting the lesser of 2 evil. That's not going to get us anywhere. So, going on from there, with our absolute garbage candidates that we keep putting forward and still vote them in based on the letter next to their name, worse yet, our modern society is seemingly shifting more and more socialist over time due to a poor education system that is basically pushing it. So, if we were to enact term limits, a safeguard of the establishment, and it's sad that I can use establishment in a good sense over this because that's how bad I see term limits to be at this time. If we remove the old guard, so to speak, of our establishment, how do you like the idea of Congress being filled with 13 AOCs and 15 more Pelosi's?
That's scary. Good God.
Right? Just younger versions of them.
Ugh.
Yeah. So That, to me, is a terrifying prospect with regards to term limits, because as we continue to shift more and more socialist, we're just going to more rapidly change for the worse unless we reverse course on our education and everything of that nature. So we have to slow the bleed and start reversing that course if we are ever going to be able to fix that, term limits or not. But I still do not see term limits as a good thing because they take away our ability. Our founding fathers, I believe it was James Madison, made a quote saying that the best arbiter for who is fit to serve in office are the people through the ballot box. Saying that, and this was in reference to the term limits of the Articles of Confederation being removed. He saw the issue that if we had a good representative and that representative is arbitrarily kicked out of office, the people lost their voice to say, we want to keep this guy because this guy is good. This guy is doing the right things. Now, how hard is it to find somebody that's going to push for the right things these days?
I can think of one example right now, and the only example that I can think of is Thomas Massey.
Exactly. Now, we have obviously had other good ones run for office. But they're struggling to get in because they can't afford to get in. And Thomas Massey is one of those exceptions. We don't want to kick Thomas Massey out. We want to keep him in and reinforce him with more good candidates, more good representatives, so that we can eventually take a majority and then start turning the country back the right direction. If we implement term limits, Thomas Massey's gone before we can find somebody to get in to support him. And then that person's gone before we can get somebody in to support him. We have to get numbers. We cannot have term limits because we would lose our ability to ever have a numerical advantage. And going back to lobbies for a second here, if we implement term limits, they'll be buying candidates for cheaper because they're only going to be in office for 2, maybe 3 terms. So you'll have nothing but greenhorns running for office.
Ugh.
And a lot of inexperience. Inexperience was another huge reason why our founding fathers actually removed term limits from the Articles of Confederation, because they knew that we needed to have good statesmen that understood the process and knew what to do. If you cycle our statesmen out repeatedly and through forced limits, it would be impossible to have an experienced veteran crew of statesmen to properly run the country. So, in reality, we actually still have term limits. The only thing is, we have to enforce them through the ballot box. If Nancy Pelosi was in your district, thank God she's not. She's not in mine either. But if Nancy Pelosi was in your district, for example, the people can term limit her by doing a recall election or by just not voting for her the next cycle. Be like, yep, you served your time, you sucked, get out. Term limited. And if she ever tries to run again, nope, you're still out because we know you still suck, so stay out. And that's how our system was built to be. For whatever reason, in modern day, if somebody is in office, we're terrified to remove them from office for some reason. And maybe that comes down to the fact that, oh, well, they're already there, they have the experience, they know what they're doing, but they're doing it wrong. So, get rid of them. Many people, when I mention that I am against term limits, they'll ask me or make the same remarks along the lines of, well, more of the same isn't going to fix anything. Or, well, what should we do then if term limits aren't the answer? And they're right. More of the same isn't going to work because we're seeing where that's going. But term limits aren't the solution to it. We have to do our own civic duty. And I'll ask a question before I really dive into my solution, because I do have a solution for this. If you were asked or chosen, John, if you were asked or chosen to be a representative of the people, how many people do you think you could adequately represent?
I know we've talked about this before. Let's because I know we've discussed before that the population has grown,
Yep.
but we still have the same amount of representatives
Yep.
per, and they're dealing with an ever growing amount of those who are they're supposed to represent. I mean, honestly, well, first of all, you can't make everybody happy because that's just absolutely impossible. I would say a few thousand is the number that I'm going with.
Yeah.
Because I think if you get up in the hundreds of thousands, how are you going to shut up? How are you going to take the pulse of your constituents when you have so many?
Yeah.
To me, that's the thing. I would think you'd want that number shrunk, and that way you had the opportunity to really know what your constituents want from you, the topics, the issues that matter the most, the way they want you to vote on them, and so on and so forth. So I would want that number a few thousand tops, and not 50,000, 100,000, 3 or 4 thousand, maybe 10 tops is a number that I would be comfortable with. And it's not just that. When an issue comes up, let's say they were going to do a massive change in voting, like they were going to pass a law that says, hey, it doesn't matter unless the entire United States gets hit by a tornado or something. We are not doing mass mail-in ballots anymore. Let's say that was a bill that was coming up. Now, the switchboard in my office is going to explode. Now, how am I supposed to have somebody? I'd have to have 1,000 people, assistants, taking phone calls and trying to relay all this information to me. And there's no way that you can just get all these notes and get numbers on who opposes it and who's for it. When you get into a really hot issue, again, I think it's hard to read the pulse of the people that you're supposed to be representing, because there's just too many. And I think this lends to the problem where some of these guys don't care what you feel, because you elected them, and now you got to put up with me till next time, till next election. And for those few who actually do care about what their constituents want, and how they would like you to vote, and to get input from them, when you have literally probably tens of thousands of people that you're representing, that cannot. It seems to me impossible that you could get a good reading. You're going to get people who call your office all the time on every subject, and you're going to get those who rarely call in the instance of a big issue, and then you're going to have boatloads that just never call. But I don't know how you really read and see what your constituents want, and get good feedback with them. Not to mention the fact, if when you come home, you're out of session, and let's say you want to have a town hall meeting, you can't even get a place big enough to draw enough people in to really get and sit and talk to these people and say, this is what we're going to be facing when I go back. What are your thoughts? You can't even speak to a good percentage of the people that you're supposed to be representing. So there's a lot of problems with the numbers that if people educated themselves truly on the issues and voted instead of voting by ads on TV or radio ads or whatever, or the stupid talk that they throw at you all the time, if you had constituents who were well educated and things like that, it's just then you're going to get better people elected into office.
Yeah.
But right now, the way it sits, we have a massive amount of undereducated or just misinformed or uneducated voters voting with, because politicians are good at pulling at your heartstrings and, bringing out the kids at times and elderly at times. And they got all these little groups they like to pull in on certain issues to tug at your heartstrings. Instead of voting with their mind and their gut, they're just voting because, well, I don't want to be a racist and vote for this guy, so they vote for the other person. So it's like Mission Impossible to, again, if I'm a representative, to get the pulse of my constituents, and B, with the amount of voters for one person out of this huge district, I think that also makes it more difficult to actually get better representatives voted in, because you're going to have you have this huge amount of people voting for one guy, and out of that group of people, there's a good percentage of those who are undereducated and won't be able to digest the good information you're putting out because they've been brainwashed by somebody else. There's so many levels of issues with this one topic that, which I know what you're going to say, but I'll let you say, Jesse. But I think without more representatives, we're in for a world of hurt.
Yeah, we definitely are, and you're definitely on the right track on that too. You mentioned that you wouldn't feel comfortable with more than maybe 10,000. What I see as the correct answer to that is yourself. You can only really truly properly represent yourself. So because of that being the case, and it's unfeasible to have everyone be represented in Congress individually. It's just not possible. The way to get around that is to limit that number as much as possible. Like you said, you'd rather it be maybe a couple thousand. Constitutionally speaking, on the federal level, we're prescribed no more than one for every 30,000. So the lowest number that you would get constitutionally is 30,000 if you're representing on the federal level. There is no limit to the contrary, though. So it could be one for every 750,000, like it is now, or 700 or 800,000, like it is now. So, to the viewers, please, feel free to chime in on this. What do you think should be the number? Should it be 30,000, 50,000, 100,000, 250,000? One of my solutions was actually, this is where we can finally start digging into some of this, is with that in mind, on how it may actually take an amendment, excuse me, it may actually take an amendment to accomplish this, to force Congress to do it. But, as mentioned before, I do not believe the Constitutional Convention is the way to do it at this time. And I will get into why not at this time in a bit. So my solution would be to repeal the Permanent Appropriations Act of 1929. This act is what actually allowed for Congress to lock the number of representatives at its current number. And because of that, it has diluted our representation down from, say, one for every 30,000 residents down to one for every 750 or 800,000 residents. And it's just not feasible to believe that one person can properly represent that many people. It's just not possible. It creates super majorities. It creates huge minorities that do not get their voice properly represented. So let's say it's one for every 800,000 residents. You could have, assuming we had a 100% turnout in voting, you could have 400,001 have the majority, and a minority of 399,998. That's a huge minority that's voice may get ignored simply because they're representing too many people. So, if we were to have an amendment to Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3, which prescribes no more than one for every 30,000 residents, and have it also say no less than one for every, let's just say, 250,000 residents, just to throw a number out there. If you had no more than one for every 30,000, no less for one for every 250,000 residents, you greatly improve our voice in Congress. We have a much larger voice in Congress with those numbers. This allows for us to actually have more say in Congress, have an easier job holding everyone accountable, and keeping things more in line with the people's interest rather than the political establishment's interests. And Jeff Barnett, thank you for commenting. Good evening to you as well. So not only do we have more say with boosting our numbers in representatives and shrinking the pool in which those representatives are elected from, the biggest thing that I believe is a fix with this is if we reduced all the way down to, say, 50,000 residents, you eliminate gerrymandering. How do you gerrymander 50,000 residents? How do you even gerrymander 100,000 residents? But when you're pushing close to 1 million residents per representative, it's very easy to gerrymander a district. But when you have it so fine-tuned right with the people to have a more adequate representation of the people, gerrymandering is gone. You can't do it. Try to redistrict a zone of 50,000 people to be weighted heavily one way, unless it's literally like New York City. Are you going to be able to do that?
No.
Because the districts would be so small, you can't have branching districts that have very bizarre shapes just to try and balance out how you want to shape the district to benefit your party in your state. And this is a big reason why a lot of states that vote Democrat and a lot of states that vote Republican stay that way. Is because they gerrymander their districts to keep themselves as the majority based on the voters. You eliminate the gerrymandering by improving the number of representatives in Congress so that fewer people are assigned per each representative. And the another thing about the Permanent Appropriations Act is that what they did with the one for every 30,000 residents, they did something that no other country had done yet. They had this revolutionary idea with our census. And I'm not going to go too deep on the census today, but on the constitutionalgrassrootsmovement.org, we have a blog post up that talks about the purpose of the U.S. Census. So to give a brief explanation on what the census was for, our founding fathers had in mind that historically the census for all nations was used for two purposes: taxation and conscription. Those two purposes were the only things that the census had historically been used for. What our founding fathers did was they used the census to empower the people and give them a voice in government. They said that they're going to use the census to distribute representatives evenly among the population of the various states so that the people have an adequate voice in Congress, the most numerous body of government, in order to have their voices heard in the federal body. This was a revolutionary idea. Nobody had done this before our founding fathers put this into our Constitution. So, the census actually had a very vital role in preserving our republic. It wasn't just for taxation, while that is a part of it, it was also for our representation, so that we knew how many representatives each state needed based on its population. And it was so that the people would not have a diluted population, or representation, I mean, like we have today. Today we have a very diluted representation because of only having one representative for every 800,000. So if you were to eliminate the Permanent Appropriations Act and start going back towards the original design, you improve our voice and representation and say within the political structure of this country. So, while the Permanent Appropriations Act was within the bounds of the Constitution, because it says no more than one for every 30,000, it does not say no less than one for every, like I said, 250,000. Because it only says no more than one for every 30,000, having one for every 800,000 is not unconstitutional. It's just a very catastrophic mistake, because you cannot have one representative adequately represent nearly 1 million people. It's not possible. Like you said, you'd have to have an entire switchboard team to handle all the phone calls, and there's no way you would be able to understand the desires of all 800,000 people. It's just not possible.
Now, just to add to that real quick, and because Robert brought something up Tuesday night when he said, even our state representatives are swear an oath to the state constitution and the federal constitution. So, if swearing an oath to the Constitution meant something, and the people were educated in their responsibilities, that if you uphold your oath to the Constitution and the people were well educated and wanted to keep their freedoms, then for the most part, knowing the pulse of your constituents wouldn't be such an issue. The issue stems from most of our representatives take the oath to the Constitution, but that means little to nothing to them. And then, so you have that, they won't uphold their oaths. And then again, we go back to the misinformed or uninformed populace who vote these guys in. So we have two groups. We have the representatives, for the most part, don't care about the Constitution. And then we have a big chunk of society that doesn't care about the Constitution. Now, if both of those groups, even one, let's just say our representatives were really well schooled on the Constitution and wanted to follow it, and you had some dissenting voters that didn't, we can stray a little bit or what have you, it wouldn't be such an issue. The issue is we have, I would say, 95% plus of our representatives don't follow the Constitution, and 50+% of the population has no understanding of the Constitution, believes people like Joe Biden when they say, well, we can, the Second Amendment says we can tell you what kind of guns you can have, and people actually believe that. There is such a you'd like to see say it's a narrow spectrum, but we have a lot of people who have a basic understanding of the Constitution. We have some that really, really understand it, and then we have a big majority that know nothing about it, don't really care about it, because they get their information from the television or their representative, who is also not paying attention to the Constitution. So this problem is so it's a great undertaking to
Yep.
find a solution to this issue, and that's why I keep going back. And I don't want to take away from what we're talking about in Robert's interview, but this is why I kind of keep stressing the fact of falling back on our states, getting them on track, and things of that nature, simply because of this issue right here. Representatives that take an oath, swear an oath to the Constitution, but won't uphold it, and they might if it was save their lives, but other than that, they don't care. And a great majority of people who are uninformed, misinformed, or just don't care. And this is why I keep stressing going back and just getting our states in order and saying,
Yep.
the Fed. Now, that doesn't mean I want the states to just say, worry about state. They're also taking an oath to the federal Constitution. And as long as the federal Constitution stands the way it does now and reads the way it does now, I want my state representatives to uphold their oath to the federal and state constitutions.
Yep.
But I would still like the focus to go more to the states, which is what the founders wanted to begin with.
Yep.
And then maybe we don't have to. Again, we have to worry, but we don't have to worry as much about how many representatives we have in D.C. because our state houses are in order.
Yeah, that's exactly right. If the states stood up for themselves a lot more than they do now, and you can do so in line with the Constitution, both state and federal, you strip the federal government of a lot of its authority. And you brought up Robert Brown with how many of them swear an oath to the Constitution, and it doesn't mean anything to them. But you also look at something else he said with regards to the representative out of was it Montana or Nebraska or one of those states, right? Where he had about a 50% voting record, but when people who knew and understood the Constitution really started hammering him, he started learning from that and turned into a very, for the most part, constitutional voting representative. And that's an example of how if we have an educated populace ready to really hammer down on our representatives and say, you can't do that, you can't do that, we can really determine which ones truly have the best interest of the Americans at heart, as well as the ones that want to uphold the Constitution at the very least, versus the ones who don't. Now, if you try telling Nancy Pelosi you can't do that, she'll laugh at you. But
Yeah.
But that one representative that Robert Brown had referenced during your interview on Tuesday, he obviously had the intent to swear an oath to the Constitution and uphold it. And once he was informed you can't do that, he fixed his voting record. That's the kind of people that we actually need to get in office, is the ones that even if they don't at that time have the knowledge in the Constitution, they have the passion to uphold it. And they can be educated over time. The only problem with that is you also risk them getting educated by the wrong people. If you get somebody like that in office and you have the wrong person whispering in their ear, they're going to turn their voting record even worse, thinking that they're doing the right thing. And that's why it is imperative that we actually educate ourselves and those around us on the Constitution. Robert Brown, he mentioned his own constitutional courses that he has. Between him and Chris Ann Hall, I would say they have two of the best constitutional courses out there. You also have Institute on the Constitution, that's up there. You have Patriot Academy, they're up there. But the top three that I would say are definitely Robert Brown, Chris Ann Hall, and Institute on the Constitution. Those three have the best constitutional education programs in the country, in my opinion. They will break it down to its molecular level and say this is what word for word means, and this is how you apply it to modern day. And if you apply it correctly, it fixes this issue and this issue and this issue. Um, and Looks like Jeff is saying that he's having feed issues on his end. Jeff, is that just on YouTube or is that on Facebook as well?
I'll tell you this, Jesse. I monitored Facebook for a while, and I'm monitoring YouTube now, and they both seem to be lagging quite a bit.
Yeah, I noticed that they get like little skips on occasion. It seems like the audio is coming through all right, but the video seems to skip.
Yeah.
That's probably personally on my end. I don't know if that is my streaming software or my internet, but at least the audio is still functional. As long as the audio is
at least we got audio.
As long as the audio is still smooth, then we can still roll with it. So yeah, I'll see if I can start fixing it. Oh yeah, it's apparently my software. I'm getting warnings popping up right now that says frame rate is dropping and stream quality might be affected. So I'll have to test with that and figure that out. But shoot, where did I leave off on that? What was I saying there? Oh, a squirrel. Yeah. But but yeah, I mean, getting back to the topic though, like if we can keep ourselves educated and informed on the Constitution, then we are better equipped to hold our federal and state representatives accountable. If we are complacent in educating ourselves, there's no way we'll ever be able to educate our representatives or hold them accountable. So Robert Brown mentioned that you can find his constitutional courses on YouTube, and I will definitely encourage everyone to do that since they are free. What was it? He said they were the Constitution is the solution.
Yep, that's it.
Yeah, look up The Constitution is the Solution on YouTube and study, learn, teach, spread the word, get that out there. We need to have that education. And if you have that knowledge, we can start turning things around, but we have to have that knowledge. Otherwise, it's just going to continue down the path that we're currently on. And that actually leads to another point with regards to the Permanent Appropriations Act as well as the knowledge. If we have that knowledge and we repealed the Permanent Appropriations Act and shrunk the districts, it would be much easier to run for office and win. If you have the knowledge and only have to appeal to 50,000 people, you can win. And it's an affordable race. Having to appeal to nearly 1 million people, it is going to be an expensive race. If you reduce it down to 50,000 people, lobbyists will not be able to buy everyone. Right now, they only have to buy 36 representatives. If you have one for every 50,000, they have to buy out, like, I think it's 10 or 30,000 representatives.
You know, and I just want to bring this up real quick when you're talking about buying representatives. My very first show, which I believe I called it Re-Education Radio. Yeah, that's what it was. Re-Education Radio years ago. First radio show I did. I had a gentleman on from a local Tea Party movement group, and we were discussing, electing constitutional freedom-loving representatives. And I told him, I said, here's my problem. when nowadays when you run for president, you literally got to have billions of dollars coming in,
Oh yeah.
or hundreds of millions. And I said, how many um, reliable, honest politicians are you going to get when you have to have that much money?
Yeah.
It sounds horrible, but most honest people, that are not beholden to corporations and things like that, they can't come up with that kind of cash.
Correct.
So that's one of the things. And he and I disagree. He's like, well, I think we still can. And I said, I don't know how. The only person that I saw for the time that I've really been paying attention, one guy, and because of rule changes right before the Republican convention, he got screwed. And that was Ron Paul. Ron Paul's message was relayed in such a way that he captured the minds of a lot of people who didn't think that way at the time until they listened to his message. And Ron Paul's one of the very few guys who has that ability to make freedom exciting, the ideas of freedom and liberty exciting,
Yeah.
enough to where people are drawn, almost like, I don't want to say like moths to a flame, because it's not deadly to listen to Ron Paul's message, but it I met people just at where I worked, and just talking to people in general, that really liked Ron Paul's message. That's the only guy that I can think of in the last 40 plus years that didn't need that kind of money to garner the affection of that many people, and was so uh, dangerous to the establishment that they had to change the rules so Mitt Romney would get it. And then the beauty of it was, he said, that's going to turn around and bite you guys in the butt. And so Trump runs in 2016, and the Republicans didn't really get their guy. They got Trump, and a lot of them were very angry. So Ron Paul was a revolutionary, and the guy can predict what's going to happen on all kinds of things all the time. But again, he's the only one that I know that you could put your trust in to follow the Constitution and try to solve problems with more freedom instead of less, on a federal level, than we've seen. That we've seen in literally just probably 100 plus years. Honestly, if we're going to be honest about it, the last decent president I say you had before Ronald Reagan was okay, but JFK, even being a liberal, being a Democrat, of course he was more of a classical liberal. JFK was probably the last good president we had. And what happened to him? He talked about doing away with the Federal Reserve and getting out of Vietnam, and he ended up dead. So, there was a comedian one time. He's dead now. He in a stand up, he said, I think every time somebody wins the presidency, the first thing they do is they take him to a room, they sit him down, and they have him watch the Zapruder film. Like, yeah, if you stray and don't do what we want, that's going to be you. But with the convention change or the rule changes that they had, it's going to be even more difficult now to get someone who's honest and can get enough donations to stay in the loop, continue to be in the debates, and be taken somewhat seriously. They just made it harder, especially at the end when you're trying to get the nomination for your party. So the money involved is, to me, probably, I don't know, if it's the second biggest issue, because first of all, trying to get someone who's actually honest and constitutional is one, but the money issue to me is the second biggest problem in our elections now. Maybe it's a tie, because I think the money and the honesty and having a love for freedom is probably a tie. But it's just, God, it's horrific to see, and it's horrific to know that um the love, because everybody goes, money is the root of all evil. That's not the saying. Love of money is the root of all evil, and it's apparent in our elections and in our government.
Yep. Yep. All right. So yeah, I mean, like you said, JFK. I think he would have been a pretty darn good president if he wasn't taken out. And the last good president that I know we had, like the best president we've had in the modern era, is Calvin Coolidge.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anyone else in the modern era, and I would say that's World War I and up. I consider the modern era at this time, because World War I and up is when we really kicked into the modern age. That's when we started kicking into the high industrial atomic era, and that's what I personally consider the modern age. So, with regards to the money in politics, with regards to the president specifically, if we keep the elective system that we have right now, there's no way, it would be impossible to really kick out the money, because you're having to have him elected for over 340 million people, and that takes money to reach out to everyone. That's not a cheap election at all.
No.
So that one, if you keep our current system, it's not possible. But luckily, there is, again, to quote Robert Brown, the Constitution is the solution on this. The presidency wasn't supposed to be elected by the 340 million people. They were supposed to be elected by specified delegates appointed by state legislature. When you go back to that, you don't have money in politics anymore. And at that point, you put the focus back on the state legislatures. Appoint delegates that will elect somebody who fits our interest, that fits the state's interest, that represents us the way we want to be represented. You no longer are reaching out to 340 million people. You're reaching out to, well, if we took out the Permanent Appropriations Act, let's just say 25,000 people. That would be all that elects the president. Say 25,000 people. That's no longer a money game. That is
right.
100% a scenario where you are pushing your ideals to get elected by these delegates from the various states. And you would have so much more control over that election by kicking the money out of it, simply because they might not even need to spend a penny at that point. If you're just appealing to the 25,000 people, this is my message, this is what I want to bring forward for this country, those 25,000 people can vote on that. And those 25,000 people, it is their job to vote on that. So you don't have to pay to make sure that your message is heard by them. It is literally their job to know what the candidates stand for and to vote based on that. And another thing, you mentioned how the money in politics. The seat that I wanted to run for in 2022, it is estimated that it could be anywhere between a $1 million to $1.5 million election at this time. And this is just for a state house, state house position. This isn't even a federal house position. This is just a state house position because it's such a battleground district. It's a purple district that has been held by Republicans for about 10 years, if I'm not mistaken. So it's a Republican district that's purple. It's only like a 51-52% Republican district. Democrats are dumping money into this district because the incumbent is running for Senate rather than House. So it's becoming a bloodbath district that money is being dumped into. Because Democrats in a Democrat state, I'm in Washington State for the viewers that are not aware, you have a Republican district that is losing its incumbent. So this district being a $1 million race, obviously I'm not going to be able to afford that because the district's too big. You have to reach out to too many people. I don't have $1 million to throw at this election. So that's why I backed away for an easier position. I'm just running for a county position at the moment. And here's the beauty of the county position. I don't have to spend more than maybe $20,000. I'm not spending anything in this election because this was just me putting a name on the ballot to see where I go just with my name on the ballot. This is more of a test run since I didn't get a chance to run for the seat that I actually wanted. So, me just being a name on the ballot, and on that note, I encourage everyone that sees this stream, put your name on a ballot. Be another option. Even if you don't spend a penny on this election, put your name on the ballot. You never know what could happen. Maybe somebody will say, we finally have another option, and vote for you just based on that.
Well, so in the town where I live, the gentleman that's our mayor now, he ran as this is his last term. He said, I think even his wife might have made the statement. She said, well, if he wants to stay married, he's going to stop being mayor. And so it's a rumor that somebody who was mayor several years, this probably been, God, 20, 30 years ago, is going to run again. And we're not real thrilled that she's going to be running. And I joked with my wife and I said, maybe I'll just throw my name in there. And
yeah,
even if it's just to make sure she doesn't win, honestly. And, of course, I would go to the little shindigs and state my case, which, I thought about my message, what people would want to hear from me. And honestly, the one thing that I would try to stress to them the most is that I'm going to be your mayor, but I am not going to attempt to be your mommy and your daddy and your babysitter and lord over you. I want to draw businesses into town. I want to do these things, but I would like to see, and do some things that kind of rock people back a little bit, saying things like maybe we should look at lowering the licensing fees for starting your business, or maybe even eventually eliminating them. Things like that. And even if I don't win, I just want to put a bug in people's ear. Like, we can do better than what we're doing. And, other things would be like, if we have another so-called pandemic, then I will do my darndest to make sure that we don't lock or shut down any businesses in town, that they all stay open and running if they choose to do so. And I will leave them up to them, or leave it up to them. I will not allow a health department official to come in and shut someone down because they contracted a virus. Things like that, just to kind of test the waters.
Yeah.
To see what would happen if I went out and I made those statements to an audience to say, listen, we can do way better than what we're doing. And to give everybody a quick example, we had a surplus of like $6.3 million. And the city was just hoarding money. And the state came in and said, hey, you can't just keep hoarding money. So our town, yeah, well, that's kind of what I thought. So the city decides they're going to do some projects, okay? So their first thing was they built a new police department. Now, doing the pest control job that I used to do, I had the one time I was spraying the police department and I got a chance to talk to the city marshal. And he was telling me about, somehow we got on the conversation of the current building they were in. He's like, there's mold growing upstairs. There's a lot of problems. This building's super old. And he said, all I want is, so here in Missouri, like, we have some, they literally look like a miniature mobile home that you set up offices in. He's like, I told them that's all we needed. Enough space to put desks in for my officers, a little bit of storage for, evidence and things like that, but that's all we need. And then we have We had a building that was for sale, and the city offered it, or I don't know, as a school or somebody offered it to the city for, I want to say it was like $200,000. And I talked to one of the officers, and he's like, it wasn't completely ideal. He's like, but we could have moved some things around. We could have made it work for a good, a good price. And the city's like, no. So what did they do? They ended up building a police station that cost, I believe, $1.6 million. So 8 times the money. Then we have a building on the fairgrounds that I can't ever remember the correct term, but basically they said you can't use it anymore. And so now there's talk they're going to build a new youth building, which is going to be $2.1 million. And then they said, well, we could take some of that other money and put new sidewalks on Main Street, and that'll help businesses downtown. And I'm like, so that's like another $1.2 million. And I'm thinking, okay, we have some shoddy streets, excuse me, here in town, amongst other things. And this is where we're choosing to spend the money, and I would love to bring those topics up. I would love to say, the city had a chance to buy a building for $250,000, let's say, and instead we built one for $1.6 million. And now we're going to build a youth building on the fairgrounds for $2.1 million. Do you think that money could be spent better somewhere else? Street repairs, something to that effect. Do you think that money could have gone to better places and be used more wisely? And just raise the antenna of people in town here to say, listen, the city hoarded money. I have no issue with the city not spending money, the money just going through their hands like water. I have no issue with that. But if we choose to start spending the money, can't we do a better job? And another issue is they want to hire another police officer. Well, the police officer that I have the chance to talk to a lot, I haven't seen him in a while, but I got to talk to him a lot. And he said, we went to them and said, we're under budget every year. So the money that we're always under budget on, why don't you just increase the wages of the officers we have now so we retain them instead of putting that money towards another officer, and we still probably will stay under budget even if you do that. Well, we'll think about it. It's just things like that. It's like, how much common sense does it take? We have a couple of really, really good officers, very level-headed. They don't go into a scene and instigate violence. They're soft-spoken for the most part and everything else. Why are we not listening to these guys? One guy's been here a decade plus. He's a lieutenant now. He's seen it all. Why are we not giving him some credence? Why are we not listening to guys like him? And instead going, well, he's just a lieutenant and we're the city. And well, I think just like anything else, if you have a good government, which is hard to do, don't get me wrong, but if you have a somewhat good government and you keep them small and under wraps and they don't get out of control, then I think your police departments and everything else, they can have a good working relationship that you can improve even more between the citizens and the city government and the police department. You build a good relationship, good things happen. But it's one of those things where sometimes I know you and I have talked about this before off air, Jesse, that sometimes I feel like I'm being pulled. I have this gut instinct to run. And I don't know why. I don't know why I feel this way, but there's times it's like I should just run for either an alderman or throw my name in the hat for mayor and just to see what happens here. To see even if I can stir the pot. Right.
Yeah. 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 Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
we're balancing precariously on the edge of bankruptcy. I think every day is a struggle. I literally think that, you know, of course, I know I'm stating the obvious, but one wrong move and we're bankrupt. You know, there's a lot of talk about our financial system, fiat currency, and all those things. And you know, as long as we have a fiat money, we're we're this close to doom all the time. One stupid mistake, tinkering with the interest rate the wrong way, or you know, having another 2008. Let's just put it this way: another situation worse than 2008, and you know, bye bye American economy. Um, it doesn't. And not to mention the fact that you know, we talked about education earlier. Here's one situation we really need people to understand. If we want even our if the states don't secede and they stay part of the union, and you know, we still we use U.S. dollars. So in order to keep our states uh, stable, even with a balanced budget, an actual balanced budget, one thing we have to get people to understand. I don't think enough people understand. We've discussed this many times that the federal income tax that comes out of everyone's check that has a job strictly pays the interest to the Federal Reserve Bank on the money they printed for the federal government. That's all it goes to. Because people say, well, my taxes go to pay for programs. No, they don't. They absolutely go nowhere but back to the Federal Reserve Bank. So if it's that is one huge issue. I think if we could get enough people to understand that alone, that would be a huge win. Now, Ron Paul was one of those guys. He got a lot of people, you know, he when he didn't get the nod for the nomination, he goes off and he has his own big shindig the same evening as the Republicans did, and he drew a bigger crowd. When he walks out on stage, that entire place was chanting "In the Fed, in the Fed," and it's like, I think that is one of, if we're gonna sit and try to educate people on certain topics, which don't get me wrong, Constitution, viably important, very, very important. But I think the Constitution and our monetary system are the two greatest things that we have to educate people on. The two most utterly important things to educate people on. Because if people understand that, you know, if people think that their money goes to pay for government programs that aid other people, the urge to get angry about their taxes isn't as big is when they find out, oh God, all I'm doing is paying a bank for interest that they charged our government to print the money to pay for these programs. I'm only paying interest. That, I think that gets people angrier than, you know, I just, you know, because nobody really likes to see the taxes taken out of their check, but when they understand where that money really goes, I think that's a game changer. And you know, because what bothers me is we have, you know, the audit the Fed bills that they tried to get through didn't bother me. I think it's important to audit the Fed. What scared me is the propaganda campaign that would have come out if there would have been enough bad information, that instead of leading us to sound money would have led us to a even more international fund where we'd really be screwed then, because people aren't educated enough on, you know, economics and all these things. So we have such a mountain to climb and an obstacle course to get through. And I think we both have to admit that sometimes we think that things are really awful and nobody's paying attention, and then all of a sudden you meet somebody else, or you talk to someone else, or a myriad of other things, and suddenly it seems like, okay, I think more people are getting the gist. But it sometimes it feels like we're just in this unwinnable situation. And it does. Now, again, if we want to look for silver linings on education, we look no farther than what we're going through right now. I saw an article the other day that said a lot of minority parents are saying we're going to figure out a way to homeschool our kids. So, sometimes the media and the government like to paint this, oh, these white middle class families are just, they don't want to send their kids to school anymore. No, there are a lot of minority families that are saying, yeah, I think it's just we're going to stick with homeschooling and not send our kids back to school anymore. So, even when government does things like they're doing now, it does push a bigger majority of people in the opposite direction, because now they finally see, which they should have been paying attention all along, don't get me wrong, but now they're finally seeing how corrupted our education system is. And by seeing it firsthand, because they've been stuck at home, their kids were stuck at home, they're seeing the lessons full force and how it's being taught. And they think to themselves automatically, I can do a better job than that. So sometimes government overreach does bring more people our direction. It's just our jobs to bring them even farther and give them a better understanding on all kinds of issues, the Constitution, um, government bureaucracies like the Department of Education and others, the Federal Reserve System, all these things. But sometimes it's one topic that gets people on a roll, and mine was the movie America Freedom to Fascism from Aaron Russo, when he a documentary on the federal income tax. That changed my whole perspective on everything. So I think it's one of the things we do is we find a subject that someone seems to be passionate about, that we know they're somewhat misinformed, and we lead those people in the right direction, because a lot of times you get them on that subject, they figure out how badly they've been lied to about it, and it spreads. What else have I been lied to about? And then they get into other topics, and then suddenly they're just, their minds are completely blown, because that's what happened to me. I got very angry, and I didn't get just angry at the government. I got angry at myself for not being educated enough, not understanding these things, and going along and saying, yeah, God, it sucks that they're taking taxes out of my check, but not understanding where that money went to. And then the exploration into the war on drugs and education and all these other things. It really set me on a path, and within, I would say, a year, the knowledge that I had gained was it grew exponentially, and I never, and and the thing that I found interesting, the most interesting about it is, not only did I research government and politics and things like that more, everything that I did, products that I bought, things like that, I researched much more. It made me research everything more, because it's like, dude, you've been asleep this whole time on almost everything. And it made me open my eyes to not just politics, but a lot of other things around me. And it probably kept me from doing a lot of stupid stuff down through the years. Hmm. Yes. Hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know. No. Right. Hmm. Yeah, no, we and they won't, of course, they won't know. They won't tell you who it is because again, they don't have historical precedents backing them up. And I think that's their major uh a major stumbling point there is they don't have historical precedents to back them up. This is a first time thing. And again, with as divided as we are, as Robert mentioned, it just makes it even harder when you've never done it before. And now you're wanting a population and even in your legislative houses that are so polar opposite, they can barely come together on anything. How are you going to get right? Well, yeah, that. Yeah, you're right there. How are you going to get? How are you going to get a good delegation, good delegates to attend? Yeah, they'll send four people, two hardcore Republicans, two hardcore Democrats. It'll just be like the legislative houses. They won't get anything accomplished anyway. No, no, no. There's just too much weirdness. I don't know how else to say it, but weirdness going on. That and oof, go ahead, go ahead. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mhm. And if you can't understand the very concise language of the Second Amendment, where it literally says "shall not be infringed," I mean, how much more can you clarify? Honestly, yes. Mm, yeah, I don't. No, no, thanks. I'll pass. Mm, mm. Mm. Oh yeah. No. No. Ugh. So gross. Makes you feel dirty just talking about it. It's like, ugh. Oh man. Yep. Oh. Yeah, that was I have to say as far as people that I have yet to meet like him, that's one of the best. That was one of the most informational for me interviews that I've done with somebody that I just met. Literally, I talked to him 5 minutes before we started, and holy smokes, I was blown away. I couldn't believe it. Um, it's yeah. I can't wait to do this one with Darren Miller next week because I think it's going to be, or Daniel. God, why do I always want to call that guy Darren? Jeez Louise. But yeah, I can't wait. He was on Tom Woods' show here last week or the week before last. Yeah, and it was really good. And I'm like, oh my God, this will be another dude that Tom Woods has had on. And Jesse's lined me up with this dude. This is gonna be awesome. But yeah, I can't wait to talk to Daniel Miller. I think it's gonna be another one of those that's just a home run. At least I hope so. I think it will be. But oh, you can tell. You can tell. That's going to be Tuesday, 21st. Yep, Tuesday the 21st. Yep, 6:30 Central Time. Yes, sir. And I have to, like we're talking, like with Robert. I used to think secession was kind of a crazy idea, but the more I see from the feds, and I feel like sometimes if we keep going down this road, that it's going to be harder to get away from them because they could somehow circumvent things and make it nigh impossible to get away from them. So I feel like if we see the feds continue on this path that they've been on and they continue to stay on, maybe it's not such a bad idea to secede, honestly. And I think it would be great. Like I was telling Robert at one point that, if like Missouri, or let's say Iowa, Missouri, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Texas, all seceded at the same time and said, we're going to create our own little place here on this continent and so on and so forth. With the industry that some of these states like Texas have, I honestly think we could knock it out of the park. I honestly do. But I also think this sounds awful to say, I know, but I don't care. Is that I think if we want to get rid of some of this, I'll just say it, trash representation and people who just can't seem to want to leave others alone, I think it'd be a heck of a way. I think a lot of those people would leave in masses. If we seceded, there'd be several socialist and Marxist closet or out and out in your face that would end up leaving because I don't think they could deal with that. Yeah, I don't think they could deal with that level of freedom. I honestly don't. They'd be like, oh, what's all this freedom? Like, calm down and you'll be fine. You just get to make your, yeah. This guy. Yeah, and I can't tell other people what to do. What do I do? Just live your life and shut up. What do you want? Are you gonna have a stroke? Settle down. But yeah, it would be interesting because if we divided the country, like literally split the East and West away from each other, and we were right down the middle. And like I was talking on my Missouri Liberty Report yesterday, I don't see us going, okay, you East and West Coast people can't drive your trucks through our states, and if you do, you got to pay us tax. I don't see us doing that if we're smart. We let these people travel. Yeah, I just don't even see that happening. I think I think if we want to set a good example, that's one of the things we don't do. We allowed free travel through. Now, if you come into the state wanting to do ridiculous stuff, maybe then you're sent packing. But if you're just traveling through, minding your own business, and maybe taking goods from one end of the or one side of the country to the other, I don't see us messing with that. I think that's a ridiculous idea. I think if this ever came about and a group of states decided to secede and they wanted more freedom, I would sincerely hope that we do it in a way that sets a great example to other that we succeed and other states go, holy crap, they're really knocking us out of the park. Like, wow, uh, maybe and then you get you could end up at a point where the more statist minded people, the people who seem to worship a government, are in one part of the country, and innovators and people like that will end up coming to our part of the country. And that's the thing. Think of the amount of innovation and things of that nature that could come out of a deal like this, where so many states free themselves from the shackles of the union, or from the feds. I shouldn't say the union, but from the feds. And we loosen up regulations, and we don't have a federal income tax anymore, and things of that nature. You don't think a lot of businesses and a lot of freedom minded people would jump at the chance to move to an area like that? I think absolutely they would. Absolutely. hmm Yeah, in fact, when we listened to what my wife and I listened to the interview, Daniel's interview with on Tom Woods' show, um, and she didn't catch all of it, so I was kind of filling her in, and she's like, "So are we moving to Texas?" That was like her first question. She's like, "Are we moving to Texas?" And I'm like, "Well," I said, "you'd love it because she's cold natured." I said, "I would be miserable, absolutely miserable from that heat." I would have to, bro. I could not live down by the Gulf where it seems like the heat with the humidity is like 170,000 degrees, like you're standing on the surface of the sun. I don't do well. Yeah, you just drench yourself in your own sweat. You just you literally pour soap on you, go sweat it off outside. Like, I'm clean, I'm cool. Let's do this. And, ooh. Yeah, I've never, well, I've been down to San Antonio, but when I was down there, I was like, I would have been 13 years old, 12 or 13. So I don't, and we were down there my last day of school. We got out of school, we went home, we picked up, we got all our stuff, and then we drove up to St. Louis, and my dad dropped me and my mom and my sister off, and we flew down to Texas. I don't remember the heat. I was 13, and back then, I was just like, I didn't, you don't think about the heat as much when you're 13 as when you're, now I'm going to be 49. Now I definitely think about the heat. Um, but it is tempting if Texas does this and they create an environment of peace and prosperity. It's hard to go, yeah, I'm never going to Texas, because how can you look at that and go, I don't, and not say I want to be a part of that. It would be really hard to say that you didn't want to be a part of something like that. Oh, beautiful. Beautiful. Again, I would have to build a house. Um, I would have to find a house that had, because the thought of being in Tornado Alley, it's not. I mean, we have tornadoes in Missouri, but Texas is like, they might as well call it the Twister State, because good lord, they just had another tornado day. Like, when does Texas not have a tornado? Come on, people. Yes. Yeah, I think somebody answered right at the beginning. Yeah. Ooh, that poor guy. Good Lord. Eesh. He went from slightly commie to majorly commie. Yikes. Yuck. No. He left the commie. He left great amount of commie to less commie. Good for you. Wait, what? Oh, wow. And you're telling me that somebody in the Air Force hasn't accidentally dropped a very small bomb on top of that as they flew over? Is this like a 5-pounder? Just poof. This today's news, the Lenin's statue exploded in downtown. I can imagine the crying by people if when they heard that on the news. Oh my God, they would lose their minds so bad. Why did you like? Listen, calm down. That would be freaking hilarious. That is the most ridiculous thing. Ooh, gross. Well, thanks for coming on, Jesse, and discussing things. And again, like maybe we'll do it again after the interview with Daniel Miller. Oh man. All right. Talk to you later, Jesse. Have a good one, bro.